Go ahead and call the school board workshop into session, and colleagues and superintendent will do it like we always do. We'll roll through each item. If there's something that you'd like to comment or you have questions about or superintendent information you'd like to present, please just stop me and we'll do that at that time. All right, so of course the first item on the agenda is call to order. Then we have changes to the agenda. At this time I don't have any. Section 3, recognitions. 3.1, recognition of Brooklyn Peters, Choctawhatchee High School 2020 Distinguished Young Woman of Okaloosa County. Under visitors, we have a presentation, kind of a ceremony, colleagues. 4.1, presentation of grant funds from the U.S. Department of Defense for the National Math and Science Initiative, NMSI, implemented at 3 Okaloosa County high schools, presented by Mrs. Sheila Lightbourne, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction.
Dr. White,
Yes,
so I appreciate it. So for the board, so you may know a little bit about this, but I wanted Mrs. Lightbourne to come up and just give a brief description of what this is and what we can expect on Monday. Ms. Thetford has been instrumental in this, working very hard. So this is a very big deal for our teachers and for our county. Ms. Lightbourne?
So a few months ago, you guys approved us looking into becoming a partner with NMSI, and so we looked into it, and they chose our schools. So Crestview, Fort Walton, and Choctawhatchee are all NMSI schools, and on Monday night, they will come and kind of do our launch. They were chosen because they are because of their military affiliation, how many students we have that are military there. They will focus on our AP courses and support for our students and teachers in AP. On Monday night, those 3 schools will be represented and we'll do a moment of silence. They'll do the presentation of the colors, singing of the national anthem, and the Pledge of Allegiance. So those schools can be participating in the activities. And then we also will have Colonel Brian Hogan, who is from Eglin Air Force Base. He will speak for a moment. Colonel Hunter from Special Ops, Hurlburt Field, and Ed Vega, Senior Director of DOD, Military Families Missions. They will all speak, as well as Mr. Chambers. So you'll get a good little rounding of that. Stephanie has been our lead. She's been the one organizing it all, very, very involved, and she'll continue to be the contact for our district. So I'm going to have Stephanie read to you essentially what NMSI will do for us.
Welcome.
Welcome. The National Math and Science Initiative, better known as NMSI, is a nonprofit organization that partners with school systems to set and pursue higher expectations for students, support teachers, and increase access and achievement for rigorous math, science, and English courses. NMSI's mission is that all students, no matter what their financial circumstances, race, or gender, have access to those AP courses. So with our partnership with NMSI, we're going to receive the following. Our teachers will receive content-specific training, mentoring, and ready-to-use classroom and lab materials. Students will receive 3 content-specific expert-led study sessions and a $100 gift card for each math, science, and English AP class that they pass. Schools receive help analyzing past AP data to set future AP goals to increase enrollment in AP courses and also target specific subgroups. As a former AP calculus teacher and as our district secondary math specialist, I'm super excited about what NMSI can do for our district.
Very good. Any questions or comments?
This is exciting. Thank you so much for your efforts, both of you, and I can't wait till Monday night and that presentation. So how great for our teachers and ultimately our students. So exciting.
Very, thank you.
Superintendent?
And I would just like to add, as you know, we've done a lot with teachers, professional development-wise, advanced placement courses. You know, our teachers have done a fantastic job over the years, and I'm excited that Ms. Thetford, Ms. Lightbourne, and others have brought this opportunity here for our AP teachers. So it's just another support that they are given to our teachers, and I very much appreciate that.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, so let's move on now to Section 5. We have no appointments. Section 6, public comment. Section 7, committee and staff reports. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of September the 5th through the 25th, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. Then 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of August 22nd through September 25th, 2019, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. Then 7.3, Eliza Jackson Preparatory Schools, Inc., annual financial statement and supplemental audit for the year ended June 30, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.4, Okaloosa Academy, Inc., basic financial statements and supplemental information for the year ended June 30, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. And then 7.5, the Okaloosa Public Schools Foundation, Inc., a component unit of the Okaloosa County District School Board, financial statements for year ended June 30, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
If I may?
Sure.
I am the board's liaison to the Public Schools Foundation, and we met this week, and I was saying earlier, I'm excited because the foundation is really growing, thriving big time, and thanks to the generous donations of our employees this year, a big fundraising thing we did, we now have $32,000 to give our teachers in mini grants coming up in the next couple of months. And for the public, the mini grants range from $500 to $1,500 for small initiatives that the students, that the teachers want to do with students in the classroom. So sometimes it's just that small amount that can really spark those students and everything. So I'm excited that we have that much money, and that came mostly from donations from our own employees. So just thought I'd throw that in there with the financial piece, but it's exciting what the foundation's doing right now for our teachers and our students.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you, Ms. Evanchek.
Yes, sir.
All right, so then moving on to consent agenda, 8.1 approval, 8.2 approval of the minutes of the special meeting of September 19, 2019, minutes of the workshop meeting of September 19, 2019, minutes of the regular meeting of September 23, 2019, all recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3 appropriation of District 2 School Board member capital outlay funds to Richburg School for a dishwasher in the life skills room in the amount of $599, presented by Mr. Dewey Destin and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Dr.
Yes,
White,
sir.
I would like to thank my fellow school board member, Mr. Destin, here for the contribution to Richburg School, which is in my zone. I know that particular classroom has benefited a lot from Mr. Destin's generosity in helping out, so I do appreciate that.
You're very welcome, and the program is very well deserved. They're training those kids to have a job.
Well, as you know, Ms. Gobble was the teacher behind that initiative, and I understand through her Facebook post that she was actually in the classroom last week helping with cooking and
Oh,
also.
she was trying that dishwasher out.
So is the culinary program still going?
Yes, yes.
Great.
Yes.
That's good to hear.
And it is thriving. So.
Oh, good.
Good.
All right, so 8.4 appropriation of District 3 School Board member capital outlay funds to Antioch Elementary School for office carpet tile in the amount of $10,669.19, presented by Mrs. Linda Vanchek and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, I'd like
Sir.
to extend the same courtesy to my fellow school board member, Ms. Vanchek, for again taking her money there to help one of my schools out. It is very much appreciated. Thank you, Ms. Vanchek. for
Oh,
that.
you're welcome. Glad to help.
8.15 appropriation of District 4 School Board member capital outlay funds to Southside Primary School for sidewalk canopy in the amount of $4,712, presented by Mr. Tim Bryan and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.6 appropriation of District 5 School Board member capital outlay funds to Eglin Elementary School for stage curtains in the amount of $9,398.71, presented by Dr. Diane Kelly and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.7 appropriation of District 5 School Board member capital outlay funds to Eglin Elementary School for a stage screen in the amount of $1,012.99, presented by Dr. Diane Kelly and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.8, request to advertise the public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 04-48, controlled open enrollment, presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent MIS, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
If I may, Chairman.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Horton, any big changes at all?
Welcome, Mr. Horton.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Destin. Not in practice for the district historically, but there were some changes in legislation that codified if military families had orders to come to our county, that they are to be treated as in-county residents even though they don't have an address. And through our online application process that happens after the first of the year, we've always allowed military families to make application and state that they were military dependents and therefore get preferential treatment. But because it was new language in the statute, we thought to add it in to the policy. And that's really it. So
Thank
you'll be, and just to follow up, you'll be seeing a school capacity report, probably the December board meeting, that sets the availability of seats for the 2021 school year for your consideration.
Very good.
And then we'll start the process again.
All right. Very good. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Horton. All right, 8.9, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a new school board policy 08-13, Best and Brightest Recognition Awards, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Director, Human Resources, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
And Dr. White, if you
Yes,
don't
sir.
mind, Dr. Hale, come on up if you would, and just give a brief understanding of the changes in terms of what we're doing with the Best and Brightest.
Absolutely. As you all know, the Best and Brightest statutorily changed this year as opposed to previous years. It is still a recognition it's a performance-based criterion overall, but there are now 3 separate categories determined by statute. There are now recruitment funds that are available, there are retention funds that are available, and there are recognition funds that are available. The reason for this policy is because the statute indicates that there is one of those categories that must be governed by board policy. And so we have given you this language for your consideration today, and the reason for that is that the recruitment awards are not set in stone. They give an upper limit on what those can be. The retention awards are set in stone by statute, so that's not a part of this policy. And then, of course, the recognition funds are completely variable based on the board policy. So it is our intent to provide you with the vehicle to allow us to negotiate through collective bargaining those variable salary pieces as we do with salaries each year. My conversations with the union have been very cordial, and I'm interested in being able to work with them to sign a memorandum of agreement on exactly what those recognition funds might look like each year, because, as you know, it is the superintendent's vision as well as the union's vision to recognize all employees that are worthy of these recognition funds. And so we've had those conversations with the union. I do anticipate, pending your approval of this policy, that we would be able to reward all instructional personnel through the criterion-based through the same criteria that the retention funds are across the board for all employees, not just the specifically designated ones by statute. We want to spread the wealth, essentially, is what we want to do. But the first step in that is having a policy by statute that allows us to determine the method by which the recognition funds are distributed. So that's the purpose behind this policy.
And this policy is contingent upon funding, is that correct?
That is correct, and a part of that policy language you'll see is that we are recommending that, obviously, that this would only be in effect in years where the government provides the funding.
All right.
So is it funded this year?
It is. We've
So
already received our
If this is
allotment.
approved, you can go ahead and move forward?
Well, we can, if this is approved for advertisement, we would have to wait the 45 days, and then upon that, then you guys would come together and decide whether to approve it, and I think
Right.
that would then launch the process by which we could
But the funding
disseminate
is
those
there.
funds.
Okay, great.
The funding is there, and also the highly effective and effective designations have been received too. So now it's just a matter of logistics and waiting till that we can do our timelines and get it going.
Okay.
And of course, I have to meet with the union to get the agreement with the chief negotiator, but I think that'll be an easy conversation.
It's just rare to have the funding before, you know.
Right,
Rare that
and-
they actually gave us the funding before we came up with our plan.
And I would tell you that the Human Resources Department has been in contact with some other districts around the state, and we are ahead of the curve.
Great.
There are some that have consortiums that are going together to try to decide what they're going to do, and some haven't even broached the subject yet with their board. So it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with that with their teachers. But we are committed to giving our teachers what they deserve as quickly as we can.
Well, I know it's been challenging and controversial program throughout the state, so I'm glad that thank you for
Yes,
moving
ma'am.
that forward.
Well, I support that fully, but judging by the governor's budget message, where it appears they want to give teachers more salary, but maybe take this program away altogether. So it'll be interesting to see if after we go through all of this, that it matters next year. I hope it does.
If there's really any new money, is always the
Right.
thing that we deal with. Right. Okay, anything else, colleagues? All right, thank you, Dr. Hale. All right, so 8.10, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a revised job description for a behavior analyst presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Chairman, if I might
sir.
ask, just for clarification, I noticed we crossed through a master's degree in behavior analysis and put in BCBA or BA certification. Is the object of this, is that to make it easier to recruit some folks? I know we're having
I see Ms.
troubles.
Maxey coming up.
Yep.
All right.
That is exactly the reason for this. And the reason we struck out behavior analysis is because to get this certification, they will look at your degree requirements, and there's only certain degrees that you can even have to be eligible for this certification, but that's why we took that out. It's all based on, are you able to get that certification? That was the reason for this.
I was hoping that's the direction it was going.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks.
Okay, good. All right. Moving on to 8.11, invoices to be approved for payment presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.12, school donations presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White,
Yes,
just
sir.
as always, again, thank you to all the businesses and community folks here on this list that have contributed to our schools, and it is very much appreciated.
All right. 8.13, ITB 20-05, Yale Model Number NR035DB, Reach Truck or Equal, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And Dr. White,
Yes, sir.
if you don't mind, I'd actually like Mr. Horton to come up and kind of address 8.13, and at the same time, his words, I think, would be appropriate for 8.14,
Okay.
but just to give a little bit of an understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Horton.
Thanks, Mr. Chambers. So, board members, as you likely know, our food service program generates its own revenue, and under federal guidelines, we're required to not hold more than, I think, 3 months' worth of revenue balance in the account. And so Mr. Anderson in food service has done a great job in a number of areas. First is we're looking at doing some updates to the Baker cafeteria, and so that's in progress and beginning. We've also identified Pryor as another school that has some significant needs in their cafeteria area. The other thing is that we have vehicles in food service that we deliver food and fresh food daily, and so the purchase of these vehicles is something that's going to help us kind of continue to make that happen. The other important thing from internal perspective is Mr. Anderson, Mr. Bolton have gotten together, and in some of these food service transit vehicles that might be 10, 12 years old, we're looking in maintenance to take those over, and we've talked in terms of the ability to transfer because they were food service vehicles, and so there's funding requirements there, but we're able to shift some of those vehicles over into maintenance and be used in those areas, because I've had a chance to look at some of the maintenance vehicles that are out there, and there's some 90s models out there, and so this is a win-win for us to be able to use some of those food service funds that are dedicated for food service in an area that we need them, but then to transfer some of those vehicles into maintenance where sometimes we don't have all the capital funds necessary, and we've got other needs in capital. So I think it's a a positive impact in this particular situation.
I just had one question. I noticed it was a 182-day lead time to get the reach truck.
And yes, sir. And when we had Paul McNeely a couple of years ago in the ITV through his fund to purchase a Ford Transit van, it took about 6 months to get that in. And so anything that we have that might speed that process up is important. I know that last year or early this spring, Mr. Anderson purchased some refrigerator trucks, and we have not received those yet.
I know. I went to look at them. They're still not here.
That's right. He gave me an update on those, and we're getting close, but there's a lag time on these kind of vehicles that we're purchasing that's surprising to me.
Is it because maybe they're being built when we send
They are
the-
particularly, these are particularly being built out, the ones that
Right.
the board approved earlier in the spring. And so, but I will say this, that the last vehicle purchase I was involved with in the ITV area with Mr. McNeely was a Ford Transit. And we did buy that off the state bid out of Jacksonville, and it took, I want to say, 6 months for that vehicle to come in.
Amazing stuff.
Okay.
So probably by the end of this school year, I'll be able to report that the vehicles are in, and we'll be able to transfer something to maintenance.
Are they made by GM?
No.
I don't think so.
Oh, then maybe.
Let's
we'll-
hope not.
Yeah.
These are American-made, though.
All right.
Actively here.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, thank you, Mr. Horton.
Yes. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
8.14, tag on bid purchase over $25,000. Allen J. Fleet Sales, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And I think Superintendent already indicated that this item, what Mr. Horton spoke to, applies to as well. All right, so 8.15, tag on bid over $25,000, G&A Manufacturing, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.16, exempted purchase over $25,000, estimated figures for Advanced International Certificate of Education, AICE, and Advanced Placement Exams, AP, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, Service Agreement Number 20-65, Noki Use Education, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.18, Appointment of Selection Committee for RFP 20-01, School Food Service Management Operations, presented by Mr. Stephen Anderson, Program Director Food Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Chairman, if I might, I was looking at this one since this was one of my first official jobs when I came on the board 7 years ago, and got quite complicated.
Yeah.
In fact, during that selection process, we had the head of the food service was a member of the committee. Ms. Scanlon was a member of the committee. We had 2 deputy superintendents, and I noticed this committee, we don't have any of those folks involved. On that one, we actually had a bid protest and had to go through the whole thing. Got very complicated, threatened with lawsuits. I would just feel more comfortable if Ms. Scanlon was involved and perhaps Mr. Anderson from food service. You know, I don't guess there's any cap on the number of members that can be in that committee. Is there, Ms. McGinnis?
No, sir.
It's not simple, and it gets very
I understand.
complicated. I know Tim, I hate to throw Tim into the fire pit there without having some of the folks who really understand it more. So
We appreciate the expert knowledge
yeah,
that you're offering.
I'll be
so-
making that recommendation when we vote on this, that
Okay.
we add
Yep.
at least those 2 people
Okay.
to try to smooth this out, because that's
Smart.
pretty
Smart.
rough.
Thank you, Mr. Destin.
Thanks.
Chambers, can you see about making that happen, or?
Absolutely, and so we'll definitely look into that, and we do have new board members as well. Do you, would you like also an explanation of kind of what this is and kind of the where we are in this process and where we're going?
Be worthwhile, I think. Sure. I see Mr. Anderson, I guess that's your cue. Welcome, Mr. Anderson, from Food Service.
All right, thank you. So, just in reference to Mr. Destin's, the reason I'm not on the panel is because there might be a situation where they have to ask questions about specific questions about food services that I would not be able to answer if I was on the committee. And so we decided that if I was off, then I would be able to openly answer any questions that any interested parties would have about the RFP.
And that is true, Mr. Destin. We've found before that sometimes there's technical assistance needed by the committees, and it gets very awkward if the person who needs to provide that technical assistance is there trying to score and rank the people, so that I can follow what he's saying.
Okay.
So just informationally in reference to that. And in terms of the RFP, we're obviously putting the committee together is the first thing. We're looking at the RFP really weekly, daily, talking about things. Ms. Scallon's been instrumental. Mr. Wyndham's been great. And so we're working on that. We're hoping to have the RFP out to companies in early December. That's the plan. And so right now it's really just going through, looking at the details of the current RFP and making any changes that are appropriate at this time.
And Mr. Anderson, we know what the RFP is for, but it might be helpful for the public if you spoke to what the RFP is for.
Okay, so we have a management company that works in conjunction with the district in order to provide food for students daily at all of our school sites. And so the RFP is kind of what duties the district has and then what duties the management company has, whose responsibility is what, in order to serve meals to students not only during the school year, breakfast, but also summer feeding as well.
Well, now that also is, we're asking for bids, is that correct? From other companies perhaps?
Correct.
And the company that currently has it, how long have they had it?
5 years, the nutrition group.
I remember Sodexo, who was the holder prior to that, had it for like...
I think 5 years as well. I think we've done this 2 times. This is our...
Much more than that. Sodexo held it for a long time. The question is, do we put it out for bid every 5 years, or do we have an option to just renew with the people that have it if they're performing satisfactorily?
The RFP goes out every 5 years, and then we have a renewal annually if everybody's meeting, if they're meeting the requirements in the RFP, we renew annually up to 5 years.
Well, I guess that begs the question, are they not, since we're putting it back out?
No, they've met the requirement. This is the 5th year.
So we have the option to just renew with the same present company, is that correct?
No, sir, I'm sorry. So this is the 5th year of the nutrition group being involved, so we have to put the RFP out. So whatever company is selected next, they will have an option for an annual agreement up to 5 years, and then at that 5th year, we'll have to put the RFP out again.
So there was no option to renew?
We've done that 4 times.
I'm
So I
sorry,
think
you're
what Mr. Destin is asking, I think after the 5th year, at the conclusion of it,
Right.
do we have the option to just simply renew, or do we have to go
I'm
back
sorry.
through this process?
We have to go back through the process.
Mr. McGinnis, is that your understanding?
Well, it's dependent upon how we issued the RFP and the contract in the beginning, and I don't have that in front of me, but if we did not provide for renewals after the 5th year, then we would have to go out and recompete.
I understand that, but we do have the option, because as I said, Sodexo held it here for 20 years.
Oh, we can check to see if when we put this RFP out, we may be able to add additional time. Some of these things are regulated by the actual food service program and how frequently the state and federal government wants that evaluated, but we can certainly look to see if there's a way to put a potential longer extension in there, and if so, that's something we could look at.
It's just, my question was, if the company that has it is doing a good job, typically we have an ability to extend. So if you'd look into that issue, that would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
Any other
Thanks.
comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All right, so moving on to 8.19, 2019-2020 Uniform Statewide Assessment Calendar, presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right. 8.20, Andrew Lloyd Webber American Theater Wing Grant Application, presented by Ms. Karen Monroe, Choctawhatchee High School Theater Arts Teacher, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I spoke with Ms. Monroe about this, and very nice grant. This is going to do a lot. And when you look at the list, and she's very excited. She's kind of revitalized that program there at Choctaw in the last few years. So I'm happy that, she's able to get all this. I mean, a lot of expensive things that we typically try to cover will be covered in this, so it's great to see it.
Thank you. All right, so 8.21, Memorandum of Understanding between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Big Brothers Big Sisters of Northwest Florida, presented by Ms. Cindy Gates, Program Director, Community Affairs, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.22, Memorandum of Agreement between University of South Florida and the School District of Okaloosa County, Florida for the Youth Mental Health Awareness and Training Project, presented by Ms. Terry Schroeder, Program Director, Student Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White?
Yes, sir.
So as you know, we've talked about school safety in this district, kind of looking at it in a three-prong approach in terms of hardening schools, harm mitigation, and then mental health. And there's a lot that has gone into mental health. And if you don't mind, I'd like Ms. Schroeder to come up
Sure.
and just give a brief summary of this program.
Welcome, Ms. Schroeder.
Hi. So the Youth Mental Health First Aid Awareness and Training is a Florida DOE mandated program, research-based. It came out of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Safe Schools Act. Every district in the state is required to train all of their school personnel in this Youth Mental Health First Aid Awareness. It was originally an 8-hour program. It's a nationally recognized program. The council has dropped it down for schools in Florida to 6 hours. So all of our school personnel are required to receive this training at 6 hours. So it is a challenge, I will say. It's a challenge to get everybody into this 6-hour training, but we are moving forward. I would say by the end of the year, we'll have over 1,000 employees that have gone through this training based on, we started last year and we're moving forward. We're doing 2 trainings a month. At this point, this funding that's coming from the University of South Florida is a grant that DOE has given to the USF to manage. And so this is our funding portion of that grant to facilitate these trainings. I will have to give a shout out. We've got quite a few of our staff that are trainers, and that training is pretty rigorous as well. It's a 3-day training they have to participate in. Right now we have about 20 of our staff members that are trained as trainers. We're going to get another 8 more trained in January. We're actually hosting a training here in our district that DOE and USF is going to come in and do. So we'll have 8 more, but we're also going to open that up to our surrounding neighbors to send their employees as well.
And then that allows you to move faster with training the other employees, right? To
That
get
is
through
correct. Yes,
that
ma'am.
6 hours, because that's hands-on. That's not like going online training.
That is
That's
correct.
in.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
that's challenging, like you said, to get that
It
many
is.
employees through that, but all those trainers will help, so.
Yes, ma'am.
that's
And
great.
there are requirements that the National Council has through Youth Mental Health First Aid for the trainers. They have to do the initial 3-day training, but then they have to do 3 trainings a year to maintain their trainer status. So for us, managing the whole program, it's a pretty big job to make sure that the trainers are scheduled to get the trainings that they're required to have, and then the folks that we are training have to be entered into a database. And so it's a big job, but I will tell you that I certainly appreciate the focus on mental health that our governor and his wife have brought, because as we all know, there is a huge need for our students. You can't be successful if you're not addressing those basic bottom line issues.
And Terry, for the employees, the teachers and the staff, how frequently do they have to be trained? Is it a one and done for them, or do they
No,
have to have
ma'am.
continuing ed? Okay.
We haven't been given guidance on that from DOE yet. The Youth
Be a
Mental
good
Health First
question
Aid
for them, though.
The Youth Mental Health First Aid Program is every 3 years to renew your certification as a first aider, is what we're
trainers.
called. So the challenge right now is it hasn't really been addressed at the state level as to how we're going to manage the renewals after 3 years. And for us, that's going to be coming up. We started last year, so it'll be coming up in a year or so of what we're going to do. And again, we haven't been given a lot of guidance on that yet. I certainly ask the question every time I'm in front of somebody who will listen, but we know how that goes. They'll let us know when it's time.
And thank you, Ms. Schroeder. And while you're up here, just give a brief description of the mental health counselors, how many we have and what they do.
Yes, sir. Right now, we have 12 that are currently working. We will add a 13th on October 21st is when she starts. All of our mental health counselors are licensed by the state of Florida. They're either licensed mental health counselors, they're either licensed clinical social worker, or a licensed marriage and family therapist. The state kind of refocused what our focus should be in our mental health program through the Senate Bill 7030, targeting those students that are traumatized, targeting those students that have mental health diagnoses, have substance abuse and use disorders. So that's where our focus has gone. I will tell you the statistics show that about 1 in 4 students have experienced some type of trauma. So for us, that's, if we have 30,000 kids, I'm not a math person, maybe Ms. Thetford can help me, but quite frankly, that's a lot of kids in our district that have been traumatized in some way or another, whether it's been through abuse, whether it's been through neglect, whether it's been through loss of a family member, parent, caregiver, that kind of thing. So one of the things that our mental health counselors really do is spend some time with those students in school, counseling with them. If it's more than what we can handle in a school setting, we refer them out to Bridgeway. We have a beautiful, beautiful collaborative relationship with Bridgeway. They're actually coming into some of our schools now and actually seeing kids through some telehealth programs where students are being seen by a psychiatrist in our schools, so that it's not interfering with parents having to leave work, because that's a challenge. Trying to take off from work, get your student to an appointment to see the psychiatrist. So this telehealth program, which we're piloting at Kenwood, is working really well. But our mental health counselors are actively involved in counseling, that collaborative process with Bridgeway, or the Mental Health Association, or Children's Home Society, which again, you guys have approved our agreements with all of those agencies that we're partnering with. So I think we've got a great program going.
And all of those kinds of conferences that you're referring to, those are all parentally approved.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
There's a process that we go
Yes,
through
sir.
before that.
They also serve on our threat assessment teams as well. And those assessments, I will say, when a student threatens themselves or others in our schools, now we definitely do an assessment there, and because of the statute and a threat to a school, a student, or themselves, we don't necessarily have parental consent at that point.
Right.
Should ongoing services be required after that threat assessment is done, then we seek parental consent. But that's the only time we don't get parental consent, is when it's a threat to themselves or others.
Excellent explanation, Ms. Schroeder. Thank you.
Ms. Schroeder, did you say you have 8 people and you're adding one?
No, sir, we have 12, and we're
okay.
adding 1. That doesn't include our ESE social workers, who have also changed their role just a little bit. And our ESE social workers, we do have 8 of them. We changed our focus just a little bit with our district's ESE focus changing this year. And so those ESE social workers are dealing directly, they're embedded in those classrooms, those self-contained classrooms with some of our students, with some of the more difficult behaviors that we're seeing, those EBD classrooms, CBS classrooms, and VE classrooms.
Yeah, well, the magnitude of the problem, if you're right, 1 in 4 has had a bad experience, that comes out to about 8,000 or 9,000, and you have 12 or 13 people plus those other folks. That's still a workload that's pretty monumental.
Yes, sir.
And really, you guys are probably as important to the security as the fences. So.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I appreciate what you're doing, and hopefully we can do more.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Ms. Schroeder.
All right, so moving on now to 8.23, Infrastructure Funding Agreement to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act Memorandum of Understanding with CareerSource, Okaloosa Walton, presented by Mr. Jeff Palmer, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.24, School Performance Plans, SPP, School Improvement Plans, SIP, for 2019-2020, presented by Mr. Jeff Palmer, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right, moving on now to Section 9, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations. 9.1, Employees on Administrative Leave. presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program Drop, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. 9.3, Out of Field Report for the 2019-2020 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director, Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.4, Employment Separations, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.5, Personnel Recommendations, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.6, Employee Transfers, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, Employee Suspension, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, Employee Suspension, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.9, Employee Suspension, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.10, Employee Termination, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.11, Reinstatement, Reimbursement of Sick Leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Then 9.12, Leave Without Pay, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. On Section 10, at this time, there are no items moved from consent. Section 11, Program Owners Representatives Business, Program Status Report by the Board's representative to the construction program. Mr. Destin, anything?
Well, we will have a construction meeting Monday morning before the Monday night, and I will bring
Okay.
you a more comprehensive report then.
Yes, sir, I can imagine. All right, very good, thank you. Moving on to Section 12, Management Information Technology Management Contract, 12.1 CACI, Task Order Number 2-130, Revision 1, Silver Sand CCTV Additions, presented by Mr. Dustin Keith, Specialist, Seat Management, and recommended by Superintendent Chambers for approval. All right. Moving on to the Attorney's Business, Section 13. Mr. McInnes?
Just one item, board members, a matter of information. You had approved, I think at the last meeting, the advertising of a new policy for field trips. The staff is looking at one item there that may need to be adjusted in that language, and so I just wanted to let you know we may be rescheduling that public hearing and push it to the December meeting. And if that change is made, we will need that advertising time.
All right, very good.
Now, that's all I have.
All right, thank you, sir. Superintendent, Section 14, your business, sir?
Yes, sir. A
Anything?
couple things. So sadly, here recently, we've had a few losses to the school district. Many of you know our courier driver, Mr. Steve Smith, who was absolutely fantastic in what he did. And I think every time he came around, there was a smile on his face, and he was wonderful in terms of the work that he did for this school district. So that's very unfortunate, and I know all of our thoughts and prayers are with his wife. And then also, here recently, over at STEM, one of our food service workers, Jamie Goodenough, also unexpectedly lost her life as well. So I know each of you will keep her husband also in your thoughts and prayers. And I do want to say, Career Source, as you know, we do have some hard to fill areas. Ms. Maxey and Dr. Hale have done a good job of going out on Indeed and in different areas for hard to fill positions, but also we've been talking with Career Source also and how they can continue to market some of the positions that might be vacant, that are hard to fill, whether that be bus drivers, whether that eventually be school psychologists, whatever the case might be. But most recently, we even talked to them about bus drivers and what we could do in Career Source in terms of helping us advertise. And then the Safe Schools Assessment. which is a big deal. All 67 districts have to complete the Safe Schools Assessment. And I'm going to ask Mr. Horton to come up and just share just a little bit of information. But I was at our superintendent's meeting, and they stressed the importance of this. There were some timelines with that. October 1st was a big deal for all 67 districts, and districts across the state were having some difficulty with the Safe Schools Assessment. And I am thankful for Danny Dean, our MIS department, Mr. Horton. They've helped our principals navigate that, because there's a lot to this Safe Schools assessment. So, Mr. Horton, if you kind of share with us about that process.
Yes, sir. So it's the process by which the state puts out the Safe Schools Assessment document. It was about 167 pages.
Wow.
And each school and school team was required to complete that document and have it submitted by October 1 by statute. And the document was supposed to be available in May. It didn't actually come online until into September. But our schools and principals did a great job working to get that taken care of. And I've got to say again, Danny Dean and Eric Mitchell and Dustin Keith, because a lot of times, sometimes safe school officers are from a law enforcement background and may not have the technology skills to address everything that the state throws at them. So Danny and Eric Mitchell and Dustin work very well together to make that process understandable and completable for our principals. So pleased to report that all of our district-operated schools completed their Safe Schools Assessment and submitted it on time. I will also share with you, and you may be aware of this, but we got a call last week at the end of the week on Thursday that Executive Director Damian Kelly, who's over the Office of Safe Schools in Tallahassee, made a visit to our school district unannounced to us, because he's a gentleman that just likes to go out and turn door handles and things and make sure that school districts are making their way through this safety and security piece. And so he was at Fort Walton Beach High School and Marystar Elementary on Friday morning and had a great visit with both principals, and Danny Dean was on site. We got some tremendous feedback from him in terms of the things that we were working on. And I will say, specifically Dustin Keith and another individual who works up in information systems, Dwayne Walters, have done some things in our district that are notable across the state. And so it wasn't long after Director Kelly left Okaloosa County that we began receiving calls from other districts about certain safety procedures, technological pieces that we have in place in our schools right now that I won't go into detail on in the board meeting, but that we have been put out in certain areas as a model for the state in some of those pieces. And I know Mr. Destin will agree. We've got a ways to go. We are working hard and working as quickly as we can in all areas. And so it was good to get some good feedback from the director, from Director Kelly on the Safe Schools piece.
Any questions?
That's great that Okaloosa is doing so well.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for everyone that's working on that.
So what do? Have we sent this stuff in? I mean, what do we do?
It is. It's electronic, and so it's secure, and so it has been transmitted and submitted by Danny Dean. There's a second part to this that Danny's working on right now. It is the district Safe Schools Assessment. So it's a district-wide piece.
Global?
Yes, sir. And so that has a due date at the end of this month. We're going to be briefing Mr. Chambers on that actually this morning, and then that comes to the school board, and I think Mr. McGinnis will speak to the method by which we bring that information to you, because it does have to be board approved for submission by November 1st. So I'll let Mr. McGinnis address that.
And board members, you may remember, I believe last year in handling the same matter, what we will recommend is that you convene a closed safety and security meeting of the board to have a report of the details of that, and then we will reconvene into a public meeting where you will be asked to approve in general that report, but it does contain significant detail regarding security plans and practices of the district, and those things are not disclosed publicly for protection of those systems. And that is so when we set the meeting at which you'll need to vote, we will arrange a safety and security closed meeting, probably to occur, I would guess, at the workshop meeting prior to that board meeting.
Anything else?
That is it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Horton.
Yes, sir.
All right, Superintendent, if you don't have anything else, sir, we'll move on.
Yes, sir.
All right. Board member business, and so, Mr. Destin, sir, I'll start with you.
I think I'm good this morning, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant?
Just, excuse me, one thing I'd like to report, and I see Lieutenant Venuti is in the back there, but this Saturday at Crestview High School, the school resource officers are having a pancake breakfast. And Lieutenant Venuti, I believe is it $6 or $8? $8. And they're going to be serving up pancakes from 9 until about 10, I think, or 9 till 11 or something like that, I believe it was. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. But this is a great opportunity for not only our people within the district to go out and support our school resource officers, but people outside the community to come and support our school resource officers with the pancake breakfast. Excuse me. Also, I'd just like to thank the superintendent for allowing us to go with him on the A+ recognitions, and I know in my zone we've hit several schools. I know at Northwood the other day they tried to get you to dance again, but Mr. Chambers is getting up there in age, so his old basketball injuries are starting to catch up with him. But it was great to be able to get out there to the schools and recognize these outstanding achievements. But I did want to thank the superintendent for allowing us to participate in those celebrations. So thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Dr. Kelly?
Well, to tag on to something that Mr. Chambers said, certainly having been over media services for many years, I worked with Steve Smith, and certainly think of Jane during this time. They were exceptionally close, and I know it's hard for Jane, so we'll keep her in our prayers. But also, we had a teacher from Choctaw who was a member of our church, Ms. Christensen, who was in a very serious car accident, so we need to keep her and their family in thought and prayer as well. And then also, this happens to be, to Terry's point, Ms. Schroeder's, this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and today is Mental Health Awareness, World Mental Health Awareness Day. And I didn't know until some research that this week a proclamation was actually instituted by Congress in 1990. So we always think, because we have the spotlight on mental health awareness, that it's a recent advent, but really 1990. So that was news to me, maybe just to someone else too. But to end on a positive note, this afternoon, talking about A+, we'll be going to Niceville High School, I think. So we'll start the Central Zone A+ recognition, so that will be fun. And if anybody is available on Saturday, the Blue Panthers are having a Blue Panther yard sale at the school. So come out, and I think that our friend Terry Farrar, who owns Lily Pads, is going to be running that, so it ought to be a pretty good show. I think she's got some art and auction items too.
And I know Lewis School is actually doing a fundraiser on Saturday to help with their baseball field lights and all that. So
Great.
a lot of great
Saturday
things
we
going
can do.
on. So,
That's
yeah.
it.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kelly. Ms. Evanche?
Well, tomorrow ends the first 9 weeks of this school year. 1 quarter down, unbelievable. And reminding parents that Monday is a teacher work day, so the students won't have to show up. But it is an important day for those teachers to finish assessing and summing up the first 9 weeks and getting prepared for the next one. Also, last weekend, I don't have a comprehensive list, but it evidently started the season for band contests, and all the bands that participated from our district, everything I saw, superior all the way. So I'm very proud of those programs. Those students sometimes do a ball game on Friday night and get up Saturday morning and head off to a contest. So shout out to them and their directors. Also, speaking of music, coming up on October 21st, there's going to be a concert of combined middle and high school chorus groups, and they're going to all perform at Maddie Kelly that night. So that's going to be a really great show to have going on out there. So mark your calendars for that. And I have an employee I want to recognize today, Mr. Jameson. If you'll start making your way, I see you've got a little scooter there. This is October is Fire Safety Month. It used to be Fire Prevention Week, but it's changed. And now we look at it for the whole month. And I want to thank all the fire departments in our areas. They really do work well with our school district and a lot of different things. But Mr. John Jameson here is a longtime employee, and he is our fire inspector for our district. And I invited him today to share with us a little bit of what he's been doing. That kind of tags with our safety, but he's been doing that before safety was cool, so to speak. So welcome, Mr. Jameson, and thank you for your service to our district, and give us a couple of tidbits about what you do and everything.
I appreciate it. Like she said, we work with the fire departments and all that, and after 2002, the state required we have our own fire inspectors, so I inspect all of our schools, all of our extra buildings and all that, and make sure that everything works properly and everything's safe. And we also deal with the AEDs. We keep them all up to par, and pads changed out, and fire extinguishers and fire hood suppression systems have to be checked every year. That we take care of that. And just recently, we've been doing playground safety inspections, which I was going to be at today, but the inspector got sick, so that allowed me to come here. So there's a lot to it, and it's a fun, and a lot going on, a lot more than you realize. I didn't realize what was actually involved in an actual fire inspection until I went to the 5 required classes and took the state certified test, and it amazed me what's in them books. It's just hard to believe how much is all involved. But thank you for recognizing me. Appreciate it.
We thank you for what you do, because that's a lot to cover throughout the district, so thank you for your work here.
Thank you.
Okay. And one more quick thing, if you don't mind. We were talking about some employees, but we lost a community member also this weekend, unfortunately, who is a true friend to Okaloosa schools. That's Mr. William Bill Robinson. Mr. Robinson was the executive director of the United Way for 25 years, among some of the other things, but it was hard to find a cause or an organization in Okaloosa County that Mr. Robinson didn't have some kind of affiliation with over the years. And like I said, all those things, he was a true supporter of Okaloosa County schools. I was fortunate enough to teach both of his sons, and I knew him personally, so Godspeed to Mr. Robinson, and thinking of his family this week. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Banchak. All right, colleagues, if you'll look down on the agenda there, the last section on the agenda will be public comment. We don't have any for today. There may be some Monday evening. And unless there's something that we need to conclude with, colleagues, anything else? Superintendent?
Yes, sir.
Mr. McInnes, I'm prepared to, this meeting is adjourned.